Hello, everyone. Hopefully, as you may have noticed occasionally happens, I didn't get cut off by my recording in the middle of my first sentence. But if you are here, you should be here for my World Civilizations class at Catawba Valley Community College. Today, we're going to begin our first real series of lectures, which is how the rest of the course will mostly be conducted. Starting with our first topic of week 2, the Neolithic Revolution and River Valley Basins of Africa and the Middle East. Now, one thing you may have noticed here just from the title and that you need to be aware of is that in this class, we are going to have to cover quite a bit in a short amount of time. This is only a 12-week course, so I've essentially had to combine 16 weeks of material somehow into 12 weeks. So I have cut some things out that I would normally teach and combined some things together. As a result of that, if you're ever confused, please let me know as soon as possible. I'm more than willing to try to clear up any problems you may have any way I can. But I just do want you to be aware that we are going to have to cover quite a lot in a very short amount of time. Somehow I'm expected to teach you about 5,000 years worth of history across pretty much every continent in the world. So it's going to be a bit of a struggle, but bear with me as much as you can. Now, the way I'll always start off these lessons is with your key terms. Make sure you pay close attention to these when you're going through lectures and taking notes. This is where a lot of the information for your content quizzes and writing assignments are going to come from. So, naturally today, we're going to talk about the Neolithic Revolution. We're going to look at the region of the world called Mesopotamia. We're going to look at a system called irrigation. We're going to look at the Nile River Basin. And we're going to look at Egypt's Old Kingdom. Now, the next thing I'll always do after giving you the upcoming dates is going over some of your upcoming assignments. Now, unfortunately, this is actually a typo on the writing assignment. I apologize. One thing you need to be aware of as well is that in order to make the workload a little bit easier on my end, is I'm drawing a lot of this material from the other classes I'm teaching that are a full semester. So, this is giving me a good time to let you know that if you do have a discrepancy on a due date in the PowerPoint or in Blackboard, most of the time you should go with Blackboard. So this should actually be due on the first Friday of this week. It'll be your first major assignment. See the last PowerPoint or assignment prompt for details. And of course, as I showed you in the course intro, which if you haven't viewed that already, please do so, all of your major assignment prompts and rubrics are already on Blackboard. Your first content quiz will be coming up on October the 2nd. It'll be due at 5 p.m. Just a quick reminder, you'll answer five of the short answer questions, 2 of the mini essay questions. Remember that answering more than a requirement will not improve your grade. I'm just going to grade the first questions you answer so I don't waste your time or my time while I'm grading. Now, another thing I want you to all be aware of. A few of you have already done this, which I really appreciate, but you all need to be aware that your initial office hours meeting does have to be conducted at some point. All you have to do is meet with me during my scheduled office hours or by appointment before the end of our first unit, which is on October the 16th. Details on how to join my office hours can be found in the announcements section of Blackboard, as I mentioned in the course intro. Just to give you an idea of what to expect, all we're going to do is we'll discuss any questions or concerns you may have about our class, and you'll have a chance to tell me about your plans and ideas for the final essay. Just to be clear, if you don't have a really clear laid out plan yet, that is totally fine at this stage. I just want to get you to start thinking about it so you're not trying to throw it together at the last minute. Now, other thing I want to go over really quick before we get into the actual content today, as soon as I find a place to put my face, I do want to make sure you know what I look for when I grade writing assignments. For a good thesis statement, you must have a clear argument, so you're making a clear argument and you're not just summarizing a topic. You have to list your major topics that you use to support the argument, and I need you to use specific evidence over general statements. That should be pretty straightforward. In regards to your evidence throughout the rest of the essay, I expect you to use specific evidence. They need to be documents or videos from class and research. Again, no general evidence that could apply to any situation. Specific examples. Bring up specific people. Bring up specific documents, specific places, and specific civilizations. Also, another reminder, every writing assignment requires primary and secondary sources. I want both. Finally, give me a well-organized structure. I want a typical intro, body paragraph, and conclusion structure. For these regular essays, don't try to do anything fancy. Make sure you're just getting your argument across as clearly as you possibly can. Again, here's another bit of an example of how good thesis statements could look. This one right here gives a very clear argument and gives reasons, it gives a main topic why. So again, make sure that's how you structure your thesis statements. To get a little more specific about that, here's some thesis statement examples. What I'd like to do is just take a second to rank these from worst to best. I'll give you a second to do that in the comfort of your own home, then we'll discuss it as a group. Or I'll discuss it to you watching as a group, however this works. So anyway, in order to save time, actually, go ahead and pause the video if you don't mind, and go ahead and rank these from worst to best. All right, I'm going to assume now that you've unpaused the video. Let's go through these worst to best. Which one of these is actually the worst? The worst one would be number 3. LeBron James and Michael Jordan have both been basketball players in the NBA. That is not making an argument at all. That is just summarizing a fact. Which again, you need to be making an argument with these thesis statements, not just stating a fact. The second worst is number 4. Some people believe that LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan. That's also not really an argument. You're at least starting to make a statement that maybe one of these players is better than the other, but all you're really doing is saying what other people believe. That's still not really an argument. Second best is number 1. LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan. This is making a clear argument. However, I don't really know how you're going to support this argument, which means number 2 is the best thesis statement. Here we have LeBron James is a better basketball player than Michael Jordan due to his wide range of skills, including passing, scoring, and defending. So not only are you making an argument, I know some of the specific details you're going to bring up in your essay to support that argument. Make sure your thesis statements look like number 2 as much as possible. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the actual things I had planned to discuss for today. Civilization really got its start, as far as most historians and archaeologists are concerned, around 10,000 BC, about 12,000 years ago, during the Neolithic Revolution. During this revolution, humans learned how to domesticate plants and animals, practice settled agriculture, and practice pastoralism. Now, why would having domesticated plants and animals maybe be a benefit? Again, pause for the audience. This is going to happen quite frequently, by the way. Since I can't actually talk to you all directly during this, I'm just going to leave awkward pauses where you're hopefully figuring out questions at home. But as you might imagine, since we now have the ability to raise our own plants and animals, we no longer have to be hunters and gatherers and scatter all across the globe just to find things to survive. With settled agriculture, we can now grow our crops instead of, again, growing crops in one place or finding crops in one place and migrating somewhere else. With pastoralism, we're now also able to raise our own livestock and have herds. Essentially, this all means that we have a more settled lifestyle. Since we don't have to travel around the world anymore or constantly migrate just to survive, we can build more settled societies. Because when you don't have to worry about just finding food and your daily survival necessities all day, you have the time to devote to other things to improve your life. Because of this, various improvements occurred all across the world during this time. For example, in Central Asia, we had domesticated gray wolves by 13,000 BCE. In pastoralism, which was developed by 5500 BCE, protein, dairy products, and wool were available for various individuals across the world. In the Jordan River Valley, barley and wheat had been domesticated by 8000 BCE. Rice had been cultivated in the Yangtze River Valley and the Yellow River Valley by 6500 and 5500 BCE respectively. In the Sahel region, villages and towns were able to spring up across Africa from 8000 to 2000 BCE. And in Mesoamerica, maize, squash, and beans were developed by 8000 BCE. Now, just to introduce a common theme you'll see a lot in this course, what are some of the major differences that occur, or what causes a lot of these differences in what is produced in various places across the world? Like, for example, why do you have wheat in the Jordan River Valley, but you have rice in the Yangtze River Valley? Right. Those of you familiar with world geography are probably aware This shows the importance of the environment and climate, especially at this time. Climate change and the climate and the environment in general are going to play a very big role in how these early civilizations develop that we're going to discuss over the next few weeks. So make sure you keep that in mind. Environmental differences play a huge role. Now, the importance of rivers. Why do you think rivers would be such an important issue in the first civilizations, and why would some of these first cities develop in river areas? Again, hopefully at home you've been thinking of some of this yourself. Keep this question in mind as we go throughout the rest of the lesson. Now, the first civilization really to have been recorded was in Mesopotamia, which in and of itself is actually a translation of the phrase region between two rivers. This civilization was located in modern-day Iraq, as well as portions of Syria and Turkey, between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, which you can see here. The secret to how these civilizations were developed was irrigation. Anybody out there know what irrigation is? Again, pause for the students at home. But yeah, as many of you are probably aware, irrigation is a process where you take advantage of the river and control its ebbs and flows in order to water your crops when they need watering, and as well to prevent flooding. This is particularly important because the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers typically flooded during the growing season. Any of you who are familiar with growing crops or farming, why is that going to be a problem? How many of you have ever overwatered a plant, for example? Yeah, exactly. Students that aren't actually here. If you overflood certain types of plants, it'll kill them just as much as starving them of water will. So because of this, they built levees along the banks and ditches to control the flood water. They could let water in when they needed it and keep water out when they didn't. This allowed them to grow a wide variety of wheat, millet, sesame, and barley plants. So again, how does this demonstrate the importance of irrigation? What is irrigation now allowing people to do? All right, yeah, I already stated the basic benefit, as you probably heard, the whole protecting them from flood waters and letting them access the rivers as a resource. However, this also allows people to have an agricultural surplus for the first time. We'll look a little bit in just a second about how an agricultural surplus benefits a civilization. However, in the meantime, let's look at the beginnings of trade in Mesoamerica, or in Mesopotamia. This is going to be a very common theme we're going to look at throughout the rest of the course as well. Why exactly do you think trade exists? Why did it exist in these first civilizations? All right, this is probably a pretty easy concept most of us can grasp, because we all trade at some point in our lives. For example, on an individual basis, you'll trade something if you have access to something that somebody else wants, and they have something else that you want. Keep in mind something I mentioned earlier. All of these different places have access to different kinds of resources based on their climate. So because of that, no region of the world has access to everything they might want in order to build a civilization. Because of that, trade needs to exist and is necessary for the growth of civilizations, because all of these civilizations you see here need to have some sort of access to the various resources they might need in order to improve their civilization. So again, keep that in mind. Trade is very important for all these civilizations to develop. For example, in Mesopotamia had a hard time at first because they lacked the wood, stone, metal, and other construction materials they needed in order to survive. In order to get access to this, they traded their textiles and oils to get cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Turkey and Iran, and lapis lazuli, as you can see here, from Afghanistan. Any of my gamer fans in here might be aware that lapis lazuli is a mineral in Minecraft. I thought that it was only in Minecraft, but turns out it actually exists. So even I learned something today helping to get this lesson together. The first cities also were recorded as having emerged in Mesopotamia because of this agricultural surplus. Now think, why would an agricultural surplus be necessary for a city to exist? I'll give you a second to think on it. If you'd like, please pause the video and take a second to think. Alright, I'm going to assume now that you've come back, we'll get used to this online teaching eventually. Now think about what would happen before, again, the Neolithic Revolution. Before this, people were, again, as I mentioned, just having to constantly scour their surroundings just to find what they needed to survive. However, once you have irrigation and you're able to get access to the water and have an agricultural surplus, you're all of a sudden not only having to be concerned with not dying every day. Because of that, it frees you up to build new things, to get access to new things. That in turn will eventually allow you to access these cities. Also, people of these cities were able to emerge because people are now migrating to the region. This is called urbanization. Why do people typically migrate to cities when cities develop? Again, assuming you're hopefully back from a pause, that is again a very typical response to the formation of cities. Once cities develop and have a bit of a surplus and job opportunities, like we mentioned earlier, it attracts people to the cities. So once Mesopotamia was able to use irrigation to build up a surplus, it attracted people who wanted to take advantage of that wealth. So, for example, some of the first cities in recorded history were Eridu, Nippur, and Uruk. They're located in southern Mesopotamia and were part of the Sumer or Sumerian civilization. Just a bit of a fun fact to help show you some of the relevance of this. Uruk or Ur is credited as being the birthplace of the religious patriarch Abraham, who's sacred in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Just to give you an idea of how old many of these cities were. Most of these cities were centered around a theocratic society. Can anybody at home tell me what a theocratic society is? I hope you guys don't mind me drinking water in the middle of these, by the way, but I have to record about 6 of these a day whenever I record them, so it can be it can make me lose my voice a bit. So it's either this or I get really raspy. Yeah, a theocratic society is, as you may be aware, it's a society that is either theoretically ruled directly by a god, or at the very least is a society that's being ruled by religious priests or individuals who claim to be representative of the gods. Most of these cities, as you can see here in this map, were centered around temples, with the temple at the center and the goods and services surrounding the city. This demonstrates the importance of religion to the life of these first cities. City-states also started to form during this time period as well as the cities got larger. Each city-state basically functioned as its own nation, which was a city-state, which is ruled by a king who is a representative of that city's god. For example, Nana, the moon god, was believed to be the patron god of Ur, and Enlil, the god of air and storms, was believed to be the patron god of Nippur. So again, each of these cities would have their own patron god. The king was believed to be their representative. Each city had a very strict social hierarchy initially. Now, what exactly is a social hierarchy, and why would you want one? Yeah, hopefully you're figuring this out on your own a little bit at home. But yeah, a social hierarchy, students who got this correct, is of course just where you have all of your classes clearly outlined, and each person is put in a strict social class that they usually don't deviate out from very much. The way these work in these cities was very simple. You would have your king and priest together at the top. Why would they both be at the top? Alright, remember, what kind of government system do they have? This is a theocracy. If you're claiming that you have your authority because you're a representative of the gods, if you're a king, you need the priests to be on your side because they help give you legitimacy as the representative of this god. So again, they both have to rule together. Basic regular politicians called bureaucrats would be next. Then you had your craftsmen and your traders and your regular workers at the bottom. These cities were also important because they are credited as being the first place writing was developed by about 3200 BCE. Fun fact, archaeologists think that the first writing was actually created in response to economic needs. Why would you invent writing to help out with the economy? It's not a very fun reason, by the way, I'll go ahead and tell you. But yes, as any of you, I think for example, some of you are planning to open your own businesses someday. This is very relevant to you, actually. If you want to be involved in this trade that's helping to grow your civilizations, you need to have record keeping. Keep records of what you need and keep record of how much stuff you have. So therefore, writing was originally developed in order to keep record of all this trade that was going on. Also, want to give you a bit of a snapshot of what Sumerian religion was like. Make sure you keep an eye on this because you are going to have content quiz information come from here. But one of the greatest religious epics from ancient Mesopotamia is the Epic of Gilgamesh. As you watch the summarized version of the epic here, keep a few things in mind. How might this epic have been used to benefit Mesopotamian society? How did it benefit the elite and the regular classes? What was the point of the final moral at the end? And what similarities do you see in here between other religions? In the meantime, let's go ahead and move over to Egypt and the Nile. There are a few differences you need to be aware of between Mesopotamia and the Nile River Basin. First, only 3% of Egyptian land was cultivatable, I can never pronounce that, which essentially meant that only 3% of the land could actually be farmed. The Nile River was much more gentle and reliable in comparison to the Tigris and Euphrates. It didn't flood nearly as much and provided more reliable nourishment. The Nile River is actually 4,238 miles long, stretches all the way down to Central Africa. It is also bordered on the east and west by deserts and to the south by massive waterfalls, as you can see here. How do you think these differences are going to make Egypt develop a little bit differently than Mesopotamia? All right, let's take a look at it for a second. They can only farm about 3% of their land. The Nile River is very reliable and dependable, and they're bordered by all sorts of environmental barriers on the outside. As you might imagine, this is going to make them even more dependent on the Nile River than Mesopotamia was on the Tigris and the Euphrates. Because of these deserts and the waterfalls and the lack of cultivatable land, they really can't rely on anything or migrate anywhere except for relying on the Nile River. This is why part of the reason why the Nile River is such a famous river and why Egyptian society is pretty much completely surrounded by it. Now, just to give you an idea of what Egyptian society is historically like, I want to give you a bit of an idea of the big picture. Throughout its history, ancient Egypt was of course led by a pharaoh. This was the person charged with preventing disorder by all the monsters and marauders and all sorts of diseases by again appeasing the gods. So you have another theocracy. Throughout ancient Egyptian history, there were about 31 dynasties from 3100 BCE until 332 BCE, ending with the conquest of Alexander the Great. This history was marked by 3 major periods of flourishing and breakdown. First would be the early dynastic period and the Old Kingdom, what we're going to look at today. Then you had another intermediate period which led into the Middle Kingdom, a second intermediate period which led to the New Kingdom, a third intermediate period, and the late period after the conquest of Alexander the Great. So that's just the big picture. Keep that in mind as we talk about how these different kingdoms transition into each other. So today, like I said, we're going to look mainly at the Old Kingdom, which has been considered Egypt's golden age. This gave me sort of an idea of a question to run by you guys. Why do so many societies have some sort of golden age that they talk about in their history? What's the point of this golden age? To give you a bit of a modern example, without taking political sides, don't worry. Why do you think during his campaign, and during his campaign now, Donald Trump would always say he was going to make America great again during his campaigns? Alright, and again, not taking sides necessarily one way or the other, but just like Egypt did, this is a way to use history to your advantage. It's essentially a claim saying, hey, there was this great time in history and we've sort of declined since then, but don't worry, I can help bring it back. Like how Trump said America used to be great, he is going to help make it great again. Again, not taking sides on that, don't worry. But essentially, I just want to throw it out there that that's one way a lot of times people tend to use history. You claim that the past used to be better and you can bring it back. Egypt was really no different. The Old Kingdom started with the Third Dynasty, which lasted from 2686 to 2613 BCE. It, for example, saw the creation of the Djoser's tomb, which is the oldest stone structure in the world, which was actually used to celebrate the infamous Sed ritual, which helped affirm the Egyptian pharaoh's position as a representative of the gods. and was designed by the great architect Imhotep. Does that name sound familiar to any of you? Please tell me it does and I'm not just an old man. Some of you might have probably figured this out. Imhotep is the name of the priest in the Mummy movies. So again, it shows a little bit how influential these societies can be. The fourth dynasty created some of the more infamous creations of the Egyptian civilization, the Gaza pyramids. One of the most famous, the pyramid of Pharaoh Khufu, rises still to this day about 481 feet off the ground and is the largest stone structure in the world. Interestingly, and one of the reasons people think it was built by aliens, is that it is perfectly aligned to the north, south, and east and west. So it essentially serves as its own compass. So again, these are just a couple of reasons of why the Old Kingdom left such a big impact on Egyptian history. To give you a bit of what their life was like, it was very theocratic, just like Mesopotamia was. It was centered around a few gods, some the chief of which being Osiris, who was the god of regeneration in the underworld, Ra, who was the sun god, and Amun, who was the creator and the hidden god. The social hierarchy was also very similar. You have the pharaoh at the top. He's the vessel the gods work through to nurture all of humanity. Why do you think the pharaoh would want to be viewed that way? How does that help him give his rule legitimacy? All right, again, it's a very good example of how these kings use religion in order to keep their authority. If his subjects believe that the gods are working through him to benefit everyone, they're likely to stay loyal. Very similarly, the priests were also towards the top of the hierarchy, and they were the only ones who were allowed to enter the temple sanctuaries and communicate with the gods. Why would that protect their authority? Pause for the students at home. Yes, it's again showing how they're using religion to support their authority. If they're the only ones who get to hear directly from the gods, everyone else in Egypt has to depend upon them to find out what the gods want. The rest of the humanity had to worship indirectly in Egypt. They would give offerings, prayer, and had a strong devotion to different magical amulets, divination, and omens. Now, also want to mention Egyptian writing really quickly. Ancient Egyptians were credited with using two types of writing. You have hieroglyphs, which was their sacred carving, which you can see here, not very common. And then you had hieratic writing, which was translated to popular and common use, and was used for record keeping and literature. Why do you think the hieroglyphs or the sacred carving would be much less common? Alright, as you might imagine, it's a status symbol. If only the temples and the royal people are able to use this writing, it serves as a status symbol and shows how they're better than the rest of the lower classes, and can also reinforce their connection to the gods as well. Another example of this is that many of the elites in Egyptian society would often be buried with their textbooks beside them. This shows how important writing was to the Egyptians and how it served as a status symbol that they were wealthy enough to obtain an education. Alright, that's pretty much all I have for you this time. Please do remember your writing assignment 1 is coming up pretty soon. I will fix this typo before I post it onto Blackboard, but make sure you check my syllabus for the due date of the writing assignment. And remember your content quiz is coming up in a few weeks as well. If you have any questions about any of this, please do let me know as soon as possible. But otherwise, have a great rest of your week. Thank you.